Okay, it's 3:02, so we're expecting a few more participants, but why don't we get started? Welcome to Pre-Shift, Tidbits of Wisdom for Everyday Use. I'm TJ Griffin. I'm the corporate wine educator for Winebo, and I'm going to be helping out today. Please note, use the Q&A rather than the chat bar to submit questions. We will be answering as many questions as we can at the end of the webinar, and we will have a record of all questions and try to respond to all if we can. Let me introduce our host for today's webinar. Master Sommelier Ron Edwards is a surfer, the father of 5 girls, a media entrepreneur, a foodie personality, and one of America's most entertaining and trusted wine and culinary ambassadors. He has over 20 years of hospitality experience, and since 2018, he has been the director of wine education for Winebo. And now, here to talk to us about the adventure of wine by the glass, Master Sommelier Ron Edwards.
Well, hello, TJ. I should have had you do this last time. That radio voice is amazing. This is just like back in the good old days when I had my radio show. Thank you so much for helping. All right, so let's get started. TJ is going to work with me today. He's going to help me stay on track by prompting me with some things, and we're going to talk about some reasons for wines by the glass.
Yeah, Ron? What is the reason that by the glass programs are around in the first place?
So we got some pictures here to sort of put that in perspective. You've got the reality of accommodating guests, right? The idea of, well, they don't want to order a bottle, but they still want to have some wine. The idea of supporting your menu, meaning the wine by the glass can actually lead to bottle options. And then the other is just, at least at the very minimum, the idea of profits, because while, yes, you're accommodating guests, the glass pour program for restaurants is a huge adding to margin. You know, most restaurants are running a margin of 75% or a cost of goods sold at around 25% for their wine by the glass program, which contributes a great percentage-wise, at least, help to the way the bottom line works. So those are really, really important. And then, you know, another one which we don't often talk about is the idea that it actually can add to the experience of the guest, the adventure of the guest.
So those first 2 reasons are super important, of course, but not as interesting. So offering adventure is, can you explain that? How does a by the glass program offer adventure?
We're definitely going to get into that, because I think that this is where you start to become more than a delivery service at the table as a frontline employee or even as a sommelier, is the idea that I'm here to add to the evening, and the wine by the glass program has a place to add to the evening. If you go back and tune into my 30 seconds, it's part of your 30 seconds episode. It's part of your structure of getting to this part of the evening is going to the table with a plan. So the wine by the glass program becomes part of my plan as I approach the table to get them started with something. So for me, it was always, I'm trying to get them to order a glass of sparkling wine for 2 reasons. 1, it's going to elevate the experience, and 2, it's very, very rare that a guest has a glass of sparkling wine and stops there. They tend to move to something else, which means the check average is going up, the enjoyment is going up, and the adventure is going up.
So what are the traps here if we focus just on accommodation and profits?
Well, one of the big issues here is if our only thought process to our by the glass program, and here now I'm not speaking to the person who implements the wine by the glass program at the table, but rather to those of us who write them, is the idea that if we're only writing a by the glass program to accommodate our guest, meaning just to give them something to order instead of a bottle, we often limit what we put on there. Those are the fairly short glass pour programs usually. The ones that only have the most common varietals don't really offer a sense of exploration or anything like that. It's really a utilitarian approach. The other concept here is if you're only focused on profits, meaning I can only offer wines that absolutely help me. Every individual wine has to be that 25% cost of goods out the door or below. You tend to limit the ability to explore other options, meaning instead of taking it as a holistic approach to your glass pour program, the profit center will sometimes drive down the wines you choose to offer into a I don't know, a less exciting category. It has to be balanced. You can't have all expensive wines by the glass. You can't have all low tier wines by the glass if you're offering true adventure, but you still have to be cognizant of profit. So, I mean, all of these, you still want to accommodate the guest. You still want to make a profit that supports the hospitality business you're running. But if those are your only concerns, they tend to limit the exploration of the guest and honestly the experience. The other thing that's interesting is I put that giant glass there because a lot of times people have decided, well, we're going to make a lot of money off the wine by the glass. So there's a few restaurants I've been to that they're pouring like an 8-ounce glass of wine as a wine by the glass. And I'm sure they've run the numbers to think, well, okay, I'll take my one glass at this price as opposed to my glass pour programs are always 5 ounces per glass. And that sounds like low for some restaurants. Like, wow, we could never pour less than 6. Well, it depends on your glassware. If you're good with your glassware, you can do it. And being able to get that extra glass out of a bottle by using 5 ounces means that you can use different wines by the glass, because that $10 bottle of wine doesn't have to be a $10 glass. Now it can be an $8 glass, which allows you to explore things like, I don't know, Verdejo from Spain as an $8 glass in your glass pour program and add some value to the guest experience. But all of that builds a bridge. So when you build your glass pour program properly and when you utilize it properly at the table as a server or a sommelier, you're building a bridge to somewhere. You're building a bridge to the next glass of wine. You're building a bridge to the bottle of wine that the table is going to share. You're building a bridge to a trust factor that allows you to then consult with them on their next choice. All of this is part of the plan. And when you choose wine by the glass as an adventure, that bridge becomes really strong. It becomes really valuable, and it's key to helping build the rest of the evening, which is where we get to here, where you already prompted me and talked about adventure. The real goal of the Wine by the Glass program is to set the guest into a direction that feels less ordinary, that feels more experiential, that gives them added value that isn't related to dollars for their evening experience. Now, only certain glass pour program styles can do that, but you can utilize it even in a less adventurous glass pour program. And by the way, I'm going to show you some in just a minute that, still have expected wines on them. It's not like the wines have to be weird to be on an adventure. You don't have to have a bunch of producers nobody's ever heard of or grapes you've never heard of, or that you need an absolute expert guide to really define them. It's more about just broadening the horizons a little bit. For some people, just not ordering Pinot Grigio is an adventure. For some people, ordering something other than just Chardonnay is an adventure. I don't think a Sirtico, for instance, from Greece is a weird grape, but getting the average person in America to say, sure, I'll have that instead of my glass of Chardonnay, that feels like an adventure to them. And that's how we can work with wines by the glass and change the spectrum of the experience. One of the other things you can do is take them down the adventure of, wow, I'd love to create your evening for you. You've established trust because you got them to order something. Let's say they followed my path and they ordered a glass of sparkling wine. One had champagne, the other had Prosecco or something like that. They both had a really good time. They both enjoyed it. They're both happy. Now they trust me to go to the next one. And the next option might be, we have a really great glass pour program, and I'd be happy to make your glass selections for each of your courses. And suddenly you've gone from just using the glass pour program to making a mini tasting menu for them on the fly. The other thing in the ideal world is we're building that bridge to where everybody at the table ordered something while they were deciding on everything. Then they go to, maybe they order the bottle to share, or maybe they move to glass pours. I think the ideal scenario monetarily for most hospitality businesses, everybody at the table orders something other than water to get started, and then a bottle of wine hits the table, and then we hopefully sell them a beverage at the end of the night. That creates a check average that is both sustainable And also it fits within the guest's perspective of having a really good time. So setting the stage. Sometimes it's about setting the stage with the menu. So if you're a frontline employee that doesn't get to decide how the menu is structured, this might not be as important to you as it would be to those of us on the call who actually write menus. I knew so little about writing menus until I started consulting alongside of my branding and image consultant partner in the last few years of consulting outside of the corporate world. And one of the things that really helped me a ton was he said things to me like, I'm sure these wines are good, Ron, but I have no idea what you're talking about. So he helped me figure out a way to communicate to him. He was literally my guest. He was the one I was trying to communicate to. And so having some information in front of them on the menu plays a huge role in this, making sure that they can find what they want, that there's ways for them to latch on to it, noting that, like in this case, you can see on the screen that I proactively pointed them in the idea that they could have a taste, they could have a glass, they could have a bottle, that they were going to be told the same thing in every wine: producer first, bottling name, then underneath region, appellation, and finally grape, and sometimes a description, so that they knew, because you know how hard it is for us as wine professionals to know in the country of Italy, is that a region or a grape? I mean, that takes a while. And if you throw the whole world at somebody, that's not meeting them halfway. That's not even meeting them at all. We got to bring ourselves to where they are. The other thing is not to forget that you have the entire world of the bar at your disposal. This is more about wine by the glass, but don't forget that a beer on the table or a cocktail is just as good, if not better, for the restaurant in a lot of cases as far as profit margins are concerned, as opposed to that glass. But it's that venture, taste, and discover attitude we want to encourage. So as we're looking at this, and you're thinking out there in the audience as you're seeing this, there is a structure and intent of this little section of that wine list. You can see that the little symbols are next to some things that I really want them to pay attention to. Beaujolais is not weird in the stretch of wine, and none of these wines are terribly off the beaten path, except that most people aren't going to order Marsanne without a little help. Most people know Pinot Noir, but do they know Amity Vineyards out of Oregon? And if they like Pinot Noir, why not try Gamay? And so you notice that there's a structure here. If you're creating a menu, notice the structure, that the one I wanted them to try is sandwiched between the most expensive and the least expensive, so that it doesn't look like a cheaper option. It looks like a quality option. And you can take this particular section of the menu and you could add an adventure for anyone who likes lightweight red wines, and you could have them try 2 of these in an evening and expand their realm completely. From I only drink Pinot Noir to, oh, I didn't realize that Moulin Avant was going to taste that much like Pinot Noir, even though it's its own thing. Or, wow, I've never had Sangiovese that tastes like period, but I know I like Pinot Noir, and now I can have this Col Santo Ruiz, and all of a sudden I have a new world open to me. So that's where the adventure begins. The adventure begins in using these tools to guide people, to add to their experience, and to make it more valuable.
Okay, so we have a question in the Q&A from Michael. It's a good question. Is there a sweet spot for the number of wines on a by the glass list to offer enough diversity and adventure, but not overwhelm guests with too many options?
That's a great question. I actually think that it's more about the sweet spot with your staff. Because there are wine bars out there serving 100 wines by the glass and doing it successfully. They have good preservation programs, and they have a staff that's well educated enough on the breadth of their program that everybody's selling a little bit of everything instead of just one thing. So I think, first of all, look at how well you've got your staff prepared to go out and sell the wines you have by the glass. And that requires order. This is an old phrase I used to hear in actually all the way back when I worked for Mountain Jack's, if anybody remembers that steakhouse, is order makers versus order takers. If your staff is just standing there saying, what would you like, and taking an order, then your glass pour program has to be smaller, because the stuff that's needs encouragement to be ordered is going to languish and go bad. So the menu that you looked at there, I worked a lot with that staff, but it was a small restaurant. So we had 50 total options by the glass, and that included all the dessert wines, all the ports and everything, which was aggressive for them. But we made it work because we encouraged things like 3-ounce pours to explore other things. And, 3 of those wines were actually sparkling wine. And a lot of times it is 1 or 2 at best in there. So consider your staff, consider the volume you think you're going to do. So your glass pour program can vary if you're in a seasonal place. Like that was a seasonal restaurant. So in the winter, I would pare it down like 5 wines to try and maintain some quality. And then the other is don't forget about other options like having a really good sangria program where you can use wines that are not gone bad, but maybe they're questionable, and you turn them into your sangria program with a base red or a base white that you use as a constant. What else do we have, TJ?
Well, I have a question, Ron, if that's all right.
Sure.
So the Buy the Glass program is certainly an important profit center for the wine program, but in recent years, it seems in many places to be not the most value-centered option. You can buy a local craft beer, you can buy a really interesting cocktail, or you can buy a boring wine that you can see at any retail store for all about the same price. So it seems like people are shying away from that. Is that a trend that you see hopefully changing, and how can we change that trend?
I think that trend is a result of people thinking more about the first 2 reasons to have a Buy the Glass program and not enough about the topic we're talking about today. If your 2 focuses are only accommodate the guest and make sure my cost of goods is appropriate for managing the rest of my beverage program, then you're going to end up with the scenario you're talking about, because that ordinary wine that you can find at most retail locations for $10 a glass or $12 a glass that bores your customers is sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, because if they know that wine really well and they feel like they're not being given a good value on it, they'll assume that across the board. And they will turn to other options like, but that cocktail sounds really interesting, I'm going to have that instead. So it really boils down to menu design and proactive intent. So at the list that I showed you a minute ago, we survived that by making sure that the cocktails were not a trade out for us cost of goods wise, meaning they were a benefit. If somebody went down to get a cocktail, they were doing us a favor. And the other was that we had enough wines that were interesting nestled into enough wines that were very common to make people feel comfortable with the ones they knew, so that they felt like, oh, that's a good price on a California Chardonnay in a restaurant by the glass, or that's a good price for a Bordeaux Cabernet blend in a restaurant by the glass. So that's, I think the secret there is balancing out the known wines for what you're charging for them and what they're getting. So I would always scour to find a couple of vintage back, or even 4 or 5 vintage back Bordeaux Petit Chateau kind of thing that I could sell for, $12 to $15 a glass. Somebody looks down and goes, wow, that's a 5-year-old Bordeaux for $12. Wow. So then they just kind of assume that the wine sitting next to it is also a good value, as opposed to the opposite. I think that's the solution there. Good question.
All right, we have a question from Benjamin. What are some of the better selling methods that you can suggest for those of us that are trainers on here?
Yeah. Well, I hope that's the Benjamin I'm thinking of, in which case I've taught him most of the tricks already. But I would say that, selling tricks are all about making the staff as comfortable as possible with the information, making sure they know how to pronounce it, make sure they know how it, and we're going to talk about this in another session later on. So tune back in for being a tour guide, because that's where we're going to talk about that, is the association game. Meaning, I know you like Chardonnay from France because you just told me, so I know that you will also like these 3 other wines on our list, and you try to get them to experiment. The other thing is experimentation from the guest perspective has to be perceived as completely risk-free. So your staff has to make sure that they can communicate that if I'll pour you a little taste. And if you're not on board with me, then no big deal. We'll try something else. I just want to see you have a good time. You know, if they feel like sales in the restaurant game, to me, is not about selling. It's about building trust. It's about getting the guest to a point where they feel like that all you're asking is, let me give you the best experience after, if possible. And then they'll melt. They'll just let you do what you need to do. I watched it happen over and over again, and I saw the exact opposite. When somebody didn't gain trust, then it's resistance all the way. So I think that that's the key. And that's all about those first 30 seconds that we talked about last week, where it's body language and communication skills and showing interest in them before interest in what the restaurant has going on.
All right. We're at the 20-minute mark now, so I think we're going to wrap up for today. But I do want to remind you, look at the screen here. Our next pre-shift is on June 3rd, same time, same channel. And the topic is Grapes Aren't Weird, We Are. So please tune in to that. Thank you to Ron Edwards. Very much appreciated. And thank you to all our attendees. And we love seeing you, and we hope to see you again in the future.
Thank you, TJ. I really appreciate your help. We're just going to do it this way from now on.
Sounds good.
Take care, everybody.